Okay, so since I have now watched the entire pre-time skip of One Piece, I decided I'm going to review it all here and now. One Piece has become not just one of my favorite shows ever, but one of my favorite things I've ever witnessed. It is truly a masterpiece of television, and I think that there's nothing truly like it. So I really want to put a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of work into making this video, and here we go. I'm going to be reviewing every single arc of One Piece pre-time skip. Romance Dawn is definitely a bit better than some of the earlier arcs in the series, mainly because it has Luffy's backstory, which is absolutely fantastic, Zoro's backstory, which is quite good, but beyond that, it's not really all that special. Of course, one big issue I have with a lot of these earlier arcs is there isn't that much tension or build up. It's just kind of wacky fun, which is cool, but at the same time you kind of want that sort of tension, those sort of stakes that we get in other arcs, and I think that's definitely a big problem at the beginning. It's clear that Oda didn't really have this flow with how he wanted to tell his story like how he has later on. He definitely took a bit to really get into this more interesting part that we see later on with One Piece, but also at the same time there's all these different sort of foreshadowing key plot points and ideas that we haven't even seen paid off in the series yet, even though it's been over like 1,000 episodes. It's crazy how they're able to do that, to take these sort of key plot points at the beginning and slowly develop them as we go along, and seeing Luffy's whole, how his morals were set and how everything that's been built from episode 1, like how he is as a person, was all made by Shanks, and how that all works out is fantastic. There's definitely some great ideas and stuff that they were able to put in here, but it's definitely not one of the better arcs. This one was cool because it introduced Nami and this, I guess, pretty cool story about this dog that's trying to protect this pet shop, which is definitely one of the key, like, sort of hints of Oda taking these random characters we don't really care about and hardly are really in it. We never see them again, but have us give them this very, like, emotional backstory that we're able to sympathize with and care for them, and how they do that is it's really well done. I don't know how he's able to make that work so well, but it's clearly shown here, and it's a nice touch. And Buggy is a pretty fun and enjoyable villain, but beyond that, it's a pretty dull story. It's not very interesting. Like I said, these earlier arcs are not very good. They are really hard to get into, and they're really hard to enjoy compared to what we get later on. Now, Syrup Village did introduce my favorite character, Usopp, but at the same time, when it comes down to it, he's not very interesting in this arc specifically, and in general, this arc specifically is not very interesting and pretty unimportant beyond the fact that it has one of the more important members of the Straw Hats joining the crew. Other than that, it's a pretty forgettable arc and doesn't have very much to offer. It's like 10 episodes, and it definitely does feel kind of boring and drags, which is surprising because there's certain arcs that we'll get to later that are like 30 episodes long, are way more entertaining than this. It just wasn't something that I really had a good time with, and because of that, I can't rate it very high. Sanji, in my opinion, was definitely the highlight of this arc for me. He's such an interesting character. I love his backstory with Zeph, and how, because of this genuine kindness that came from him, he thinks he owes his life to him. Sanji thinks he won't ever be able to repay the kindness he gave him, and because of that, he stays to help him at his restaurant, which would seem fine. However, Sanji's dreams and aspirations sort of get in the way of this, and he wants to go and search for this thing called the All Blue, but because of Zeph's kindness and because of all that, he thinks he has to repay him. But the truth is, all Zeph wants is for Sanji to be happy. He wants him to go and search for his dream and see him achieve it. And when he leaves and says his final goodbyes, it's one of my favorite moments in the show. Don Krieg also isn't a bad villain. He's the first threat where we actually feel some sort of intimidation. The battle is amazing with Don Krieg beating the crap out of Luffy and Luffy getting up no matter what and being as determined as ever to defeat him. Mihawk was a great introduction, and seeing the battle between him and Zoro really shows the type of person that he truly is. An honorable, hardworking individual that is willing to do anything to achieve his dream, and it's great to see that. Also, we see how this moment really changes Zoro as the series goes along. We see him laughing and being happy before this, but as soon as this happens, he becomes a lot more stoic, like even more so than he was before. It's very interesting to see those sort of slight subtle details as he develops right after this. It's very interesting to me. Arlong Park is the first great thing that One Piece has to offer. Nami's backstory is so amazing and tragic, and you truly understand why she is so greedy and selfish. She lost her mother, her entire village was taken over, and the only way to bring any of it back was by stealing money to buy it off, which is why she turned into this money-hungry person who hates pirates. At first, these small little details about her seem like jokes, but once we get to this point, it just seems sad and depressing, especially when we see Nami get betrayed by Arlong, even though it's not surprising. At the same time, we feel bad. Also, I think the scene where Luffy says he'll help Nami is not only amazing because of Luffy, but it's also fantastic because it's showing Nami opening up to people. Nami was someone who didn't really want help from anyone and didn't want to open up to people. But here we see her character development as she changes, and it's really great to see. There's also so many great moments as well, like when we previously mentioned, when Sanji, Zoro, Luffy, and Usopp walk face to face against Arlong and his crew, or even that amazing scene when we see Luffy destroy Nami's room on his spite for Arlong. Also, speaking of Arlong, he's quite an intimidating villain, but the main thing that sticks out to me is Arlong being what primarily strives in water, and Luffy, who can't swim, is a very interesting rival for him, as he's fighting someone whose strength is his weakness, and it plays out for a lot of interesting fight sequences. Of course, even then, the battle between Luffy and Arlong is a great one, and it's just exciting and exhilarating, and it shows the type of character Luffy truly is. He's someone who's willing to stand up to what he believes is right, and will fight it even if it hurts anything close to him, regardless if it's right or wrong, which is why I love Luffy, and we'll see this in later arcs as it goes along. I love the introduction of Smoker. He's a very interesting person because he's the first one we don't really consider to be evil. He's a good man with good intentions, but doesn't realize that all pirates aren't bad. Love the ideals between Zoro and Tashigi. They believe certain things, yet they're on different sides. Zoro and Tashigi are both people who believe to fight for what's right and are honorable. However, they're both on different sides, so they believe in the same things, but both have different ways of going about it. Also, there's so many great moments as we see Luffy talk to this older guy in the bar and him seeing this sort of will from Roger in a way. Also, the execution moment was great. There's so many memorable moments that are continued throughout this short episode package. It's just a really solid entry. This overall was okay. I love the story of Brook and Laboon as it is set up later on Thriller Bark, which I'll talk about when we get there. But this sort of arc was only good at the finale as we see Luffy drawing something on his head as a sign they will meet again. Just shows how pure Luffy can be at certain points and how much of a kind person he can be. It's a really nice moment, but really the only moment that's really worth remembering. It was really fun to see Luffy and Zoro fight, and it was a good introduction to the Alabasta arc, which we get later. But beyond that, there's not much else to say about it. It's short and isn't exactly a big arc with a lot going on, but it's fun. Mr. 3 is an enjoyable villain, his plan is very entertaining, and I like how this helps to slowly build into the Alabasta arc. I think I just like how it shows how truly creative the One Piece writers are and shows how much stuff is going on in the world. This idea of a prehistoric land where Vikings have fought each other for 1,000 years is such an odd concept, but it works quite well. You really love their bond and their rivalry together. It's just so truly inspiring and entertaining to watch as well. Also, Usopp admiring them goes right along with his character. As somebody who wants to be a brave warrior, of course he admires people like this. Then there's even little moments like Zoro trying to hold a pose when he's about to get turned into candle wax, or when Luffy randomly guesses who Mr. 3 is, or even when we see Zoro and Sanji's rivalry start. It's a pretty fun arc with a lot of good episodes. Drum Island was really the second best arc at this point. First off, I love Chopper's backstory. It's my favorite because of how tragic and complex it is. This whole thing about him being different and made fun of, and the only person who ever really truly cared about him died, and him not wanting to open his shell to new people because he thinks he'll be judged, is heartbreaking. That scene where Luffy calls him his friend is the most heartwarming scene that I've seen ever, and seeing Chopper truly start to open his shell and be more comfortable with others is great. I also absolutely love this stuff with the professor, and his last words are truly amazing, but also interesting and motivating in a sense. The last positive, but that scene where Luffy climbs the mountain with Nami on his back and Sanji by his teeth is fantastic. It really shows the type of person Luffy can be at sometimes. And I know that I've been repeating that over and over again, but there's so many little moments like that where it really shows the type of character he is. He never really gets any sort of development for the most part, but he has these morals, these values, and we see him stick through them no matter what. Alabasta is pretty much the perfect arc. Crocodile is an amazing villain that has such an interesting and complicated plan that I wouldn't expect from the show. This whole idea of him having everybody admire him, pretending to be a hero, and then turning the people against the king is truly beyond what you'd expect from a One Piece villain at this point. The pacing is great. It's slowly built up, yet well done as a whole. They do a great job at making it fun, but also giving ideas of political themes and slower moments. The fight scenes are amazing. Everyone gets a moment to shine. Zoro's fight is great. Usopp has probably my favorite fight in the entire arc, as we see him so willingly and determined. It really shows Usopp's character, because even though he's a coward, when he needs to defend the people that he cares about, he doesn't fail to try as hard as he can to do that. He's someone that has absolutely no confidence with himself and doesn't think he'll win almost all the time, but always does it anyways, regardless of the situation, and it makes him such an interesting character as this normal guy who just happens to be in these situations. And seeing him sort of defend Luffy's honor in a way, which sounds really cheesy and dramatic, but also is kind of true, as he won't let them make fun of Luffy's dream, as he believes himself that he'll become king of the pirates. It's one of my favorite moments in the entire show, and I absolutely love it. Then we have Luffy versus Crocodile, where he can't just use brute strength and is forced to think more outside the box, and is one of the many moments we see Luffy adapt in battle. It's really interesting to see him use water as a way to defend against Crocodile being sand. It's very interesting, and it works very well. It shows that Luffy isn't a complete idiot. He can actually be quite smart sometimes. The introduction of Robin was good and sets up the sort of character we see from her later on, as this depressed loner who never has found a family of her own and wants to kill herself, and Luffy tells her she can't. He's not doing this because he's trying to torture her, but because it's the right thing to do in Luffy's mind, and because of that, it makes sense why he acts this way. And overall, just concluding this massive in large story in such an amazing and satisfying way, giving you everything you want. I can't believe they were able to do this so perfectly well. It's really the first time you watch this show and think this is perfection. This is what One Piece is in a way. It's this perfect story that's able to take these political themes and somehow make them work with this really crazy and wacky tone and make it fun and enjoyable, but also make it something meaningful. Skypiea has so much to offer. I love the lore of Skypiea. They really take their time in having you slowly get to know the story and history behind this world and have you get to know it as it goes along. Also, there's no really foreshadowing of later arcs, so they can just cram this all in a really nice way. And that was a fantastic villain and a great idea of what dictatorship can be like. This idea of one singular person controlling everything to the point where nobody is above them and that they can do anything they want and go to the point where they become so delusional they think they are a god when they obtain the certain level of power above people. I also like the religious aspects, this idea that we shouldn't just blindly follow religions even if it has been in our generations for years. Now, just because it's a tradition doesn't make it okay, and we can acknowledge this and not blindly follow religion, dictatorship, or anything for that matter. Also, the fight between Enel and Luffy might be the best animated yet. It's so bright and colorful and well choreographed. I just love everything they do with it. However, while I love a lot about it, there definitely are some things I don't like about it. For example, it can definitely be slow. When we get to near the end, it feels like the episodes are dragged out, and I don't mean a ton of that. There are 3 whole episodes after Luffy defeats Enel, and it feels unnecessary. However, even with this said, it's still a truly great arc and has a lot going for it. Water 7 was really a great arc. I love the fight between Luffy and Usopp, which is a truly heartbreaking and sad fight, but also you understand both sides and their situations. Luffy thinks that they should just get rid of the ship because if they keep it going, it's going to break and his whole crew is going to die. And of course, Luffy isn't going to want that to happen. Usopp, on the other hand, really cares deeply for the ship, not just because it was a gift from Kaya, but also because he believes there's a heart and soul to it in a weird way, which makes this even more complicated and really, really sad in a way. A lot more sad than you'd really expect, especially since it's just over a ship. They keep repeating memories of them with Usopp to show that this is what Luffy is thinking during the fight, which shows how hard this is for them, even if on the outside he's acting like it's not difficult. It also shows the hardships that Luffy has to have as a captain, that he also has to stay mentally strong so that he can motivate his crew to keep going forward regardless of what happens. Lots of interesting arcs are slowly built up, and I like how they have multiple different things going on to make it all more layered. Frankie's introduction is very interesting because we know nothing about him, and we're curious to know more as it goes along. And then we get his backstory, which is him dealing with consequences of the weapons he built, and that having an effect on his father figure Tom, who gets sent to prison because of this. This whole idea that even if he had good intent, these weapons can still lead to terrible things, and we should all be held somewhat accountable for them. Frankie's introduction is, like I said, interesting, and I think there's so many ways they explore his character. I don't believe that Usopp and Frankie could all of a sudden just be friends, though, with one another. I just feel like it feels too forced, but it's not that big of a deal. I love the twist of CP9. It's so unpredictable and shocking, yet ties all the characters and everything together in a nice way. It makes perfect sense for how it happens and why it happens, but also it's very surprising. It's one of the It's probably the only twist in the show that I can really think of, and it's a great one. The fight between Sanji and the round guy is very funny due to how entertaining and animated he is, while Sanji is very stone cold and serious the whole time. And there's definitely some other cool moments as we get to the more ending part of Water 7. Overall, it's just a really great arc and probably one of my favorites. I'm honestly surprised they took two arcs this big and somehow managed to cram it into this one big super arc, which sounds really corny, but also is very true. As Water 7 sets up all the plot points, the emotional damage, everything that happens, and then as we get into Enies Lobby, there's so many amazing things that happen in it. It's all the action, it's all about the payoff, and while that makes it, I guess, less compelling than Water 7, it makes it a lot more entertaining and a lot more satisfying. As we see Luffy take out all these soldiers, and it's very fun and entertaining to watch. But I also love the build up to Robin's backstory and the tragedy of it all. All the experience she's had, that makes sense why she is the way she is. We understand now why she wants to die. Since her whole life she's been feared and seen as a monster, and ever since her entire island burned down at the age of 8, where everybody that ever knew or cared about her died, she saw everybody that ever loved her gone, with nobody to care about her or to hold on to her. No love and sympathy for anybody because no one understood her. Then seeing Robin sobbing, screaming, and that she finally wants to live after all her friends gave her a reason to live, it truly is an amazing moment. Then, after they declared war on the entire world government by burning the flag, we get this amazing moment with Robin yelling at the top of her lungs that she wants to live after the Straw Hats are willing to go against what she is haunted from for so long. I'm very annoyed at the filler they have in this arc. It really messes up the pace and really just annoys me. I normally don't watch the filler, but at this point I was, and it really annoyed me because I felt like I had to watch it, and then it just got to the point where I just started skipping it. I don't need to see Luffy's backstory again. I already saw it in the first couple of episodes. The fight between Zoro and Kako is really good. Love the animation for this fight. It's gritty, exciting, and vibrant, and from a visual perspective, one of the best fights. However, I think they should be pretty much focused on Luffy versus Lucy and the other ones. And so far, at this point, like at the point I was at, it really wasn't the case, because at the beginning, the first half or so, it felt like we hardly got any of that until as it later went on, we definitely got a little bit more of that. Sanji's fight was great. It was entertaining. It really worked out very well, and also sort of showed his morals as he couldn't fight a woman, and we sort of understand and sort of get them a little bit more, because at this point we haven't really seen Sanji fight an actual woman. If you don't count the whole thing with Bon Clay, it's pretty much what has happened, and seeing him not be able to go against his morals and refuse to go against his morals shows how interesting of a character Sanji really is. Also, the payoff was absolutely fantastic. Like I said before, from Water 7 and Enies Lobby, it's just overall great. It's a fantastic arc. It's a perfect arc. There's so many amazing payoff moments that just build it all up. It's truly perfect. I'm gonna be honest, this arc was pretty forgettable when it comes down to it. I think it was cool to see how Luffy's like impacted certain people and impacted the world as a whole. That was pretty cool. But beyond that, it's mostly just filler. This was a really fun arc, and compared to the emotional beats of Water 7 and Post Enies Lobby and Enies Lobby, this was a lot more fun to watch. I really love the creativity of this arc, with all the zombies, the ghosts, all the characters, the creatures, the overall backgrounds. It really just, like, the creativity really shines here. Some of the most creative stuff I think we've seen in One Piece, like the whole ship, how everything's designed. It's all great. I feel like we get some more interesting stuff with Chopper, which we haven't gotten since Drum Island. Really, we haven't had anything interesting with him as until then, and also these views of people as doctors and how someone he really looked up to, like Dr. Hawback, but then realized his true nature and his character brings in the reality of bringing back the dead and how even though these people are back to life at the end of the day, their hearts aren't beating. They're just mindlessly obeying orders. So in reality, they're not really alive. Best moments we've seen from Chopper, I think, as a doctor, as someone who's a nice person that wants to help people, and seeing that come into play here is great. But beyond that, there's really not that much substance to any of this. It's mostly just an arc that's really fun and enjoyable, and you're there for the atmosphere and the fun moments. It's weird though how this is supposed to be something you'd expect to be a more serious and terrifying arc, yet it's one of the most fun. And of course, there's the introduction of Brook, who is a great character whose life has been complete, living hell for years, as he's been forced to live in the shadows alone because he lost his shadow from Gecko Maria. He's someone that's so tortured and broken because of everything that's happened to him, and yet he's so fun and lighthearted. I feel like Brook is one of those perfect balances of a funny, lighthearted character, but also someone who can be serious when it's necessary for him to be. Also, his dream is so different from all the other Straw Hats. While most of them have these big, ambitious dreams, which are great, but Brook's dream is simple. He just wants to see his friend that he promised to a long time ago, which is more down to earth and normal than any other Straw Hat's dream and makes him feel so much more relatable. He's also just such a fun and likable guy, and I love him for that. Also, I love how you see these connections that Oda makes throughout the story, and this is one of the big ones as earlier, like hundreds and hundreds of episodes ago. We get this whole thing with Verse Mountain and Laboon, and then hundreds episodes later, we get this whole thing about Brook's dream of wanting to meet Laboon once he's traveled the world, and I think that's really great in my opinion. Usopp has a great fight as we see him battle somebody who has the same strength as him, but also someone who's able to make his bigness weaknesses in certain ways by using what Usopp is good at against him. I also love how he's the only one on the crew who is able to feel nothing against those ghosts. It shows Usopp's character so much. He doubts himself so much and constantly doesn't think he can succeed because of how weak he is. However, when there's stakes, he fights anyways, regardless of how negative and down he constantly is on himself and his abilities, which makes him debatably my favorite character in the show because of this, and I can say definitively, as of now, he is my favorite character in the show. And of course, we see Usopp defeat Perona, not from brute strength like Luffy or Zoro or Sanji, but from his own way by lying and being a marksman, which makes it even more satisfying by him being able to win in his own way. And I think there's some definitely great other fights beyond that. There's also Sanji vs. Absalom, which was a very fun and hilarious fight as we see these two who are almost roughly the same, except for Absalom is definitely a lot more disgusting, let's just say, than Sanji, I guess is the best way to put it. But overall, it was fun to watch. Then there's Zoro versus this samurai version of Brook, which was amazing and fun to watch as we saw him go up against someone that was so similar to him in a lot of ways, which, while being short, was really great and interesting to see. I think it shows sort of the honorability of Zoro as well as, the sort of character that he is. One thing I've noticed so far about this arc, but the highlight of this arc is definitely Zoro. Zoro is someone who I have liked throughout the series, but up to this point, I feel like he's become way better than I ever thought he could be. As for the first time, we really see his loyalty towards Luffy, but also the expectations he has for himself. Because Zoro, in his mind, he has to be able to protect Luffy as the vice captain. He has to be the greatest swordsman. He has to live up to all these promises he made, especially to Kushina. And we now see if he can't live up to these expectations he puts on himself, he would rather die than live with the failure. Zoro is so caught up in this idea that he has to win and win every time, to where if he doesn't win in his mind, he can't live with it. So in his head, he has to die honorably, which leads to him asking Kuma to let him die, which he nearly does, but is able to pull through, and leads us to this epic nothing happened moment where Zoro just took all the pain and injuries Luffy had from that entire battle like it was nothing, and didn't even tell him about it. It's one of the most honorable things I've ever seen in any show ever, and it shows the type of character Zoro is. And it's not like he's just this plain dude that will do anything for Luffy. We understand why he is this way. There's a certain explanation to it. It's not just so blatant, and I think that's what makes him such a great character. And we always get these sort of moments with characters, and these moments that they have to shine, and this is one of the biggest examples. Sabaody was an arc that I was just expecting to have a lot of fun and have an enjoyable time with it, but it is so much more than that and provides so much more than I ever thought it would. First off, we get to know so much more about the world and the characters in it as we're introduced to the 11 supernovas. We meet the vice captain of the Roger Pirates. We find out that Roger turned himself in, and we get the introduction to another Admiral, Kizaru. We get all this information about all these different characters. It's great to see the impact Luffy is leaving on the world, as well as getting information about the world and how it operates. Oda does it in this way where maybe it's exposition, but it's so entertaining to watch because of all the animations and little things that are going on screen. It makes it enjoyable and fun to sit through, even if it is just a bunch of explaining and forced exposition. It works. Speaking of this, we get another example of how scummy the world is as we get our first introduction to racism, which isn't much, but is clearly showing human trafficking, as we see giants and mermaids being enslaved and sold off to other people. I also like how they're somehow able to make this fit into One Piece, but still make it so realistic and brutal. It really shows how almost anything can be written into it and be told in a profound way, as it's definitely seen here as we see the reactions that the Straw Hats have to this. It makes them feel all the more human. Even on the top of this, racism and human trafficking being introduced, we also get commentary on royalty, people who abuse power, as we see the royal blood family, the Celestial Dragons, created the world government, abusing their power and harming everyone in the process. We see these tyrants more and more throughout the course of this arc and are just waiting to get what's coming to them. And then we finally see it happen in one of my favorite One Piece moments. It really shows the character Luffy is and how they've kind of just accepted him for it at this point. Because even though he shouldn't do it, even though it's maybe something that's a questionable decision, Luffy will do whatever he can to step up to his morals and step up to what he believes is right, and we clearly see that here. Also, we really feel the tension in the final act of this arc as the pacifistas try to make him disappear one by one, and Luffy is shouting orders, which really shows how intense of a situation this is when Luffy is acting like a traditional captain, giving orders and also doesn't want them to fight, either telling them all to run, which is why this feels so much tension when you're watching this through the last couple of episodes. Then there's the ending where Luffy sees all his friends disappear before his eyes. This isn't just said. Then there's, of course, the ending where Luffy sees all his friends disappear before his eyes. This isn't just because Luffy's sad because they're now gone and because Luffy's all alone, but rather how helpless he felt the entire time. As we've seen Luffy say before, he doesn't want to get stronger for himself, but for him to protect the people he cares about. And so much in fights, we see him constantly push himself. So Luffy seeing every single one of his friends disappear and him falling and failing to do what he was supposed to do to help them causes him to get emotional, because he's not mad at Kuma, he's not mad at Kizaru, he's mad at himself for failing to stop them, even if he was exhausted, even if he was facing someone way more powerful than himself. He doesn't care, because in Luffy's mind, it is all his fault. When it comes down to it, it's a very fun arc with some cool action set pieces and some nice world building. Now, while I do think this Island is very dull compared to others we see later on in the series, and basically just another version of Wonder Woman's Island. The thing that definitely saves it is Boa Hancock. Seeing Boa Hancock is this character who's cold-hearted to all men at the beginning of the arc, and then us later finding out the reason for this because she was enslaved and tortured from them makes so much sense why she acts like this. But then she meets Luffy, who is quite the opposite of this as someone who is selfless, kind, and honest, which of course causes her to view Luffy in a completely different light. Boa really is a great character, and that's what makes this arc so good, is seeing her development. Now, this is honestly probably one of my favorite arcs, and part of that has to do with the characters. Of course, we get Buggy, Mr. 3, who are such a funny duo to watch and make the story so much more enjoyable as they constantly keep trying to escape, but constantly keep going down lower levels with Luffy. And when they try to escape, they're just as entertaining to watch and really provide some great comedic relief to the arc. Then we, of course, get Bon Clay now. I love this character in the Alabasta arc, but he's even more amazing here as we see this lovable, hilarious character that truly values his friends just as much as Luffy. While characters like Buggy and Mr. 3 are cowardly and only wanted to help him for their own personal gain, Bon Clay wanted to help him because he genuinely cares about him. Then we see where he's motivating him while he's going through immense pain, and it's one of my favorite moments in the entire show as we see Bon Clay doing the one thing he truly can to help him. Then we have other appearances from other characters such as Mr. 1, Crocodile, and of course Jinbei, who honestly has a lot of potential as a character. I just love when we see recurring characters like this because it shows the consistency that this world has to offer. Not many shonen will take a character like Mr. 1 or Mr. 3 or even Bon Clay and have them appear several episodes later. But this show does that and has them reappear in a way that makes so much sense. Also, I think this arc has some of the best first-time characters ever. They're also vibrant and insane and wacky, such as this crazy lady, the Warren, who, while seems wacky and goofy, just as the other characters, and times he can be terrifying. He's also very threatening in the fact that Luffy didn't even beat him. He had to escape so he wouldn't be killed. Then there's, of course, the Vice Warden, who is definitely my favorite of all the jail cell guards. He's definitely the funniest and has the weirdest mannerisms. He's very weird and perverted, and he hates the Warden and will do anything to take his spot, which leads to a lot of funny moments with him. But also, we learn to understand him and see him fight so honorably and be so determined to try and defeat Luffy, and even hold him off a little bit. It makes you really respect him as we see how determined he is to win, and even though he didn't win, it was great to see him in this sort of light. Also, even though I brought him up earlier, I have to make a segment dedicating it to Bon Clay again. Like I said, he's one of my favorite characters so far, not just because of how really funny he is and his over-the-top mannerisms, but his loyalty to Luffy is great. Like I've said before, seeing someone who's so pure and dedicated to him and help him at any cost, and his sacrifice at the end was actually really emotional and great to see. Overall, it's one of my favorite arcs in One Piece. Marineford. I completely get why everyone considers this the best arc. Now, did I believe that? It's debatable. However, it truly is a genuine masterpiece. Now, I want to start off from the beginning of this arc because right off the bat, we get some amazing details about Ace being Goldie Roger's son, which is truly a great twist and an emotional backstory nonetheless, because Ace refuses to be considered Roger's son because he wasn't even alive to be there for his birth, and because of Roger's name, it made him wish he was never born. Ace asked what people would think if Gold Roger had a son, and nobody really thought it would be a great thing. They all said he would be a terrible human being, or that they would want to hurt and harm him, making him feel anger and hatred towards the people who gave him this curse and wishing he was never born, with the only family that accepted him being Luffy, Dan, Garp, and his mother, who was deceased. And then he was raised by the Whitebeard pirates. tying into the theme that regardless of who we are by blood, the people that raise us, care for us, and will be by our side no matter what are the ones we call true family. Which is why Ace calls Whitebeard his father and Luffy his brother, because they will be there for him even if they aren't related. Of course, we have the Whitebeard Pirates, who were given off a great introduction. There's not much more to say how they entered Marineford. It was cool, and we get to really see how strong they are. Then we get such an emotional opening battle with Oars Jr., and I can't believe Oda made me care for a character that we haven't even seen up until this point. All we get of Oars is a couple of flashbacks, and we instantly know why he cares for us. We see how Ace was so kind to Oars, and seeing him try desperately to repay that kindness and to be able to sacrifice himself to help beat Marineford was such a great and triumphant moment. We also get a couple of flashbacks of Ace joining the Whitebeard Pirates, and even though it's not very long, we really see his character development from being someone who wants to set out to sail across the sea to being a part of the Whitebeard crew and accepting them as his family. Ace never really had a father figure until he met Whitebeard, which makes so much sense why he would want to be his 2nd Division commander. Whitebeard accepted him like no other person has, and because of that, he wants to repay him in any way that he can. Then we get the origin of Blackbeard, and we see why Ace wanted to fight him and despised him so much. He hates Blackbeard because he betrayed the crew he loved so dearly, and because of this, he would want to set out to sea, of course, to fight him. It's so much more interesting in hindsight, because if Ace didn't go on this whole war, this probably wouldn't have happened in the first place, showing how in One Piece even the smallest things can set to something huge. Of course, we get all the admirals in this arc all together in the introduction to Akainu, which I'm going to discuss here, but I don't really care for them all that much. It's cool to see them fight the Whitebeard Pirates, but we don't know much about Akainu. Aokiji doesn't get that much screen time, and Kizaru is fun, and I love his mannerisms, but once again, we know almost nothing about him. Akainu and Kizaru are pretty much strangers to us at this point, so because of that, I just don't really get why everyone loves them so much. Now, after a lot of this happens, we of course get Luffy entering the Battle of Marineford from the sky, which is really cool. Luffy having a lot of great moments at the beginning, especially his first introduction with Whitebeard was great and truly shows the type of character he is once again. Then seeing him go straight on into the battle, I love that they didn't make him overpowered. There's so many characters in this arc that are stronger and way more powerful than him, and I think that makes it a lot more interesting than the other ones. Then there's, of course, Whitebeard. This really was his arc. Before Marineford, we didn't know much about him, but we really sort of see the type of character he is. He's a lot like Luffy, however, he's completely his own character. His dream and desires to have this family, to call his own, and to achieve that sort of dream by having his pirate crew and taking them in as his own sons, shows his character. He doesn't care about treasure or materialistic items. All he cares for is protecting his crew. He's not someone who really wants to stop the world government or even desires treasure. He just wants to live a free, adventurous life with the people he cares about most. Which makes sense why, when one of his sons is going to be executed, of course he's going to try and do anything to save him. Then we get close to the end of the arc when he dies, and it's the perfect way to conclude his character. All he ever wanted was to have a family, and he was able to die by protecting that family. Whitebeard's character from beginning to end was genuinely perfect. Also, I want to say that Kobe standing up to Akainu was fantastic because of the character development it shows from Kobe. As this very shy, scared boy that's always been afraid, standing up to somebody as powerful as debatably the strongest admiral is something that we wouldn't have imagined from him at the beginning, and seeing the sort of character development from him and how he really wants to help these people and really cares and wants to be a Marine, it's great to see. Then there's the most memorable component about this arc, Ace's death. If I wasn't spoiled that Ace was going to die, I probably would have been really surprised by this happening, because nobody really dies in One Piece up to this point, which makes it so unpredictable. The fact that normally in these arcs we haven't really seen anyone dying, that's all that notable, and then all of a sudden we see the brother of the main character dying. It's really shocking to see. It's also amazing because it's the first time when Luffy actually fails what he claims he will achieve. He wasn't able to achieve this, and because of that, it's surprising and heartbreaking. Also, it's such an emotional death scene as we slowly see Ace die and then Luffy screaming and crying in terror. It just adds to how perfect it is. Truly the most pivotal part of Marineford, and it's so surprising, and because of that, it's just so important. Overall, Marineford is probably the best made One Piece arc, but consider it the most enjoyable. It's debatable. However, it is definitely the best made. This arc is great, not just because of the story we get, the political ideologies, but because of what it really is supposed to be for. Because at this point, before this, we didn't know anything about Ace. We hardly got any screen time from him. He's kind of died, and we understood that he meant a lot to Luffy, but we didn't really know why. So this arc was completely necessary to give us that why. Why is he important to Luffy? Why does Luffy care about him so much? And seeing sort of how Ace in a way changed him. He made him a more mature individual. He sort of gave him character development in a way, as we see throughout this arc. And then we get our introduction of Sabo, who introduces this idea of nobles and like that sort of ideal and sort of a different political hierarchy that we never really have gotten throughout One Piece. I mean, we've sort of had these ideas of class with the Celestial Dragons, but beyond that, we didn't really get that much in depth about nobles and like expectations of being royalty, and we get it here, and it's done pretty well actually. And you understand Sabo's point of view, I mean, and you sort of understand the nobles' point of view, and it's all just one great big package. Overall, it's a really great arc, and even though it's not one of the most grand One Piece arcs, it's definitely a favorite.